Hi, everyone, and welcome to the She Rocks virtual red carpet. And today we have Lyndsey Parker here with us.
Hey, good to see
Hi,
you.
Lyndsey. Good to see you too. You're looking gorgeous.
Wow, coming from you. You're the expert when it comes to
Shucks,
the
thank
makeup and stuff.
Well, I'm in my kitchen. It looks like you're really on a red carpet there.
I I did the best to put like the Muppet Show, variety show curtain behind me since I'm co-hosting the pre-show. I wanted it to make it look like I wasn't in my living room. So it's a little bit, school talent show, but in a cute way.
I love a school talent show.
The
So
vibe I'm going for.
let's talk about, speaking of school talent show, you are hosting like the pre-show this year.
Yeah, I'm hosting the pre-show. The last two She Rocks Awards, which obviously happened in person, happened at the House of Blues in Anaheim during NAMM Week. I co-hosted the show. I co-hosted it last year with Mindy Abair and the year before with Christine Devine. Lizzie Hale is doing the main honors this year. I'm very happy to pass the torch to her because she's awesome and badass. But I'm still involved. I get to do the pre-show. I have a reason to dress up, a reason to put on sequins, a reason to put on all the makeup with the tips you gave me. So thank you for that.
You're
So
looking good.
I'm excited because, it's been, 2020 was such a rough year and so many award shows had to get postponed or go virtual. So I'm really happy that not only is She Rocks going ahead with like this amazing lineup, but that I get to be part of it from home.
Absolutely. How was it that you got involved with She Rocks?
I'm trying to even remember. I think just like Laura and Bonnie just contacted me out of the blue. I couldn't even believe it was happening. To be honest, I mean, I don't want to say I have like imposter syndrome or anything like that. But yeah, I think we all kind of a little bit do. And as someone who grew up loving music and like loving watching the Grammy Awards and the American Music Awards and VMAs and all of that, to even think that for any award show I'd be asked to, you know, be on the stage in any way it was just like a pinch me moment for me. So they reached out to me and I was so honored and admittedly a little bit nervous, but everyone, who works with She Rocks is so like welcoming and sweet and supportive that, once I got on the stage, it was a breeze. So I'm so excited that I'm doing it again.
I think it's really cool. And I also think it's interesting too, because for you, you really have, you follow a lot of these award shows too and write
Oh yeah.
about them as a journalist.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
what would you say is different about the She Rocks Awards versus any other award show that's out there? How is it different? What makes it more special?
Well, besides the obvious thing that it's celebrating solely women in music, which is the obvious thing. But besides that, it's not a competition, like there's no losers, there's no like best female record of the year, best female new artist of the year. It's just like everybody, it's not like everybody wins and like everybody gets a gold star, get cookie way. It's not like, in a like tokenist way. It's just like there are a lot of people to celebrate. It's just purely celebrational. When I was there last year, I remember last year because Cherie Curry is being honored this year. Last year, Susie Quattro was being honored, and Cherie
Yeah.
gave the induction speech because Cherie owes such a debt. Like Cherie just is on a soapbox about Susie all the time. If you talk to her for 5 minutes, she'll start talking about how it's BS that Susie isn't in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's like her mission in life. So I was watching Cherie on stage, practically in tears, and I was standing right next to Susie Quattro, who was all humble, like, "Aw, shucks," like me. And I was like, this is a moment, it's just like I said, it's just like everybody celebrating each other, being very welcoming. There's this, I've always hated this, obviously, honestly, John. There's this myth that women are catty to each other, that they are competitive, that they don't like to celebrate each other's successes, that because they feel like maybe there's just a limited number of slots at the top, that there's this like bitchy cattiness. The
Mm,
media sometimes stokes that with feuds they talk about or with like all
right.
these reality shows that show women fighting. Or I have very rarely witnessed that in my life. Of course, that exists, but it's pretty rare. I've really rarely existed it personally, professionally, with other writers, with other editors. I have not witnessed that between that many female musicians at all. So I hate to use the term safe space because it's almost become like a cliche, but that's sort of how She Rocks feels. There's no cattiness. There's no one who's begrudging anybody else's success or achievements. Everyone's just like stoked for everybody. Everybody's excited to meet each other. Everybody's excited to induct everybody. It's just very positive. I
Yeah.
don't know actually where that myth comes from. I guess um I honestly don't know where it comes from because I've never, very rarely experienced anything other than complete supportiveness among women in the music business.
I think as a journalist too, don't you think that you want to perpetuate that as well and let people know that. Is there anyone that is in the lineup that you're particularly, I mean, of course you mentioned Cherie, but are there people that you're like, I really want to get in there and I want to interview them and I want to have a moment with them or do a book or something or.
Well, I have interviewed the Go-Go's recently when their amazing documentary came out in 2020. It was great. It was kind of one of the pluses of having to do things on Zoom or whatever. Because I don't know if you know, Belinda Carlisle lives in Thailand,
Yes.
14 hours ahead. And I was interviewing her and Charlotte Caffey on a Zoom at like 9 p.m. Pacific time. And it was great. We were all together. I have interviewed Belinda and Charlotte at that time. I've also interviewed Jane. I've interviewed Kathy Valentine when her book came out this year. So I just got to get Gina, I guess, and I've got everybody, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of being so excited, the Go-Go's, I mean, I don't know how much time you have. I can't tell you how much the Go-Go's meant to me. And I think a lot of women would say this. I know Margaret Cho Margaret Cho is being honored this year. Margaret Cho has talked about how the Go-Go's changed her life. I very specifically remember this as like a lightning bolt moment. Do you remember the Casey Kasem show, America's Top 40?
Absolutely.
I was a little kid. I was on vacation somewhere. I was in some beach house. That's what I remember. And it was Sunday morning, and it was a tradition for me to watch that on Sunday morning. And Casey Kasem was talking about how Beauty and the Beat had just gone to #1, and he made this big point because it was a big deal, and it is a big deal, that it was the first album that was completely written by a female band, completely written. They wrote all the songs and played all the instruments to go to #1. I remember thinking, oh, that's really cool. And then I also kind of remember thinking, like, it's never happened before. And you know what? It's never happened since. It's not happened since. They were the one and done. I obviously hope it will happen again. But in terms of, and I'm sure the Go-Go's have hoped that and probably expected that. I know they've told me actually they thought it would. But it was such a milestone. I'm like Cherie Curry when it comes to the Go-Go's. I'm like, why are they not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? This is effed up. But it was a big deal. And I think it was a big deal for a lot of women, whether they were like myself and went into the business, or I know a lot of bands felt that way, because I remember watching the video for Our Lips Are Sealed, where they're driving around Beverly Hills in trashy lingerie and jumping in the fountain on Wilshire.
Yeah.
And I mean, they obviously, it's going to sound weird. I don't mean it to sound shady. They were obviously like super attractive girls, but not in a way that felt like unattainable. Like, oh, I could be one of them. They're cute. They're just wearing like thrift store outfits they bought and like put together with safety pins. And they're just like a gang of chicks who like decide to make a band together in the clubs. And they do things like drive around Hollywood in a convertible and like, cause mayhem like the Monkees or something. And they did it. They're the #1 band in the country. Like, I just felt like these could be my friends. These are my friends. So I'm very excited. And I can't believe this many years later, I'm even involved in any of that. I've ever interviewed them, let alone being involved in an event they're doing. Cherie Curry is a big one. The Runaways are a really big one for me. They're all really, really big. Heart. I mean, my God, Nancy Wilson. So, but the Go-Go's, in terms of just being one of the very first bands I ever even remember liking, that's a full circle moment for me, for sure.
That's very cool. Yeah. And then what else? What do you think for you? What did you learn about yourself this year? That was
in 2020.
Yes.
This year is already not off to the best start.
Right. You're like, this year I already learned in 2021 that I still hate 2020.
Pretty much. What did I learn about myself in 2020? That's a good question. I mean, personally, I learned that I'm actually more okay with my own company than I thought. I'm a super social creature. I was joking earlier that I'm so happy to put on a dress. My life before March 2020 was going out to gigs, concerts, and events and parties like almost every night, or several nights out of the week. And I lived for it.
Yeah,
it was my job, but I also loved it. I loved going to see live music. That's the thing I miss most. I loved socializing, so I loved dressing up. I was never someone who wear jeans and t-shirt to a concert. I'd always put on a dress, always put on heels, always put on false eyelashes. I loved all that. So, obviously back in March, we didn't know how long all this was going to go on. But even back then, on the front end of that, thinking it might be a couple months or something that I might not get to do those things and might not get to socialize with friends, because the concert and experience for me was as much about that as what was going on stage. The community of music fans in LA where I'm at. I mean, yeah, it was devastating to me then. I was like, how am I going to deal with this? But I have dealt with it. So I've learned that Even though it sucks, I am more okay with being by myself than I would have thought. I have learned that, I mean, I knew this ain't learning. I knew this. I'm a workaholic. I'm a super workaholic. I mean, I don't think I'd be a workaholic if I didn't like my job, but I love my job. And that was kind of my only outlet. And what we're doing now is what I did all through 2020. I interviewed so many people, whether it was the Go-Go's, Kathy Valentine, Belinda Carlisle in Thailand. I did interviews almost every day on Zoom. I was on SiriusXM every day on Zoom. And that became my social outlet. And I think that's why I kind of stayed sane, was because I wasn't totally alone. I got used to this. It obviously, it's not it's no replacement for actually face-to-face interaction.
Right.
But I was every day having very engaged conversations with musicians of all walks of life, interesting conversations I had to really like absorb and focus on and listen and study. And it kind of like, kept me feeling like I wasn't alone. And I think it actually really helped my interviewing skills. I think I'm a better interviewer coming out of 2020 than I was. And what else can I say? Yeah, just I'm a workaholic, and I actually will say one of the few, very, very few silver linings of 2020 is because we all had to adjust to this Zoom world. I think I got access to interviews that I might not have gotten, like people who are in other countries, people who were bored themselves. They may be celebrities, but they're bored too. So if they, not only are they more open to talking to people and promoting things because they're not having to get on a plane and do a junket, they can be in the safety and privacy of their own home. They all were more relaxed. They had more time. I was doing interviews where they'd say, "You're getting 20 minutes." I'd be talking to them for an hour.
Yeah.
They were comfortable, they're at home. And I think, yeah, they were hungering for that connection too. They were bored. So I think that was one of the few good things is I did a lot of, probably in 2020, I did more interviews that were amazing than I ever have in my career. And so, that kept me sane. So I guess that's what I learned.
I think that's a pretty great skill. I would say, the online life and maybe the things that we looked at as like, oh, I don't really do the Instagram or I don't do this. We all learned that, well, this is what we're going to have to do.
The one
So
thing that I learned, and I learned some of this from you, is makeup skills. Is I don't think we're all used to having to like look at our face on. It's like when you do Zoom stuff like this, even if you put yourself in a speaker view, so you're like just the postage stamp at the top, you're still looking at your. It's like looking in a mirror all day.
yeah.
So I started to like really get a little paranoid about, mannerisms, like Tyra Banks says, like knowing your angles, like what do I look best, like ring light. The best thing I bought during the pandemic was a ring light, which is on now. But I mean, that sounds so vain, but I think a lot of people sort of developed like facial dysmorphia because they were looking at themselves all the time.
Sure.
So that was not good, but I got used to that and, sort of worked with that world. But in general, I mean, this pandemic has sucked, but thank God we have this technology that we could still do things, whether it's interviews, the She Walks Awards,
Yeah.
it could be worse.
Well, it certainly could be, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
We're-
imagine in 1918, the pandemic in 1918, they did not have this.
right, exactly. There were no Zoom calls. It was the old tin can on a string.
Send a pigeon, a socially distanced pigeon,
Exactly. And even
6
when
feet
that
away.
pigeon arrived, you may not want to touch it. Let me ask you this too, like I think one of the interesting projects, you've done a lot of interesting projects, as far as like podcasts and stuff. But I love the whole idea that like, you own that you were like a Duranie,
Oh, yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it's sort of cool that like, you made this revelation that like, hey, I'm a band fan, and how do I write about this? And you turned it into something really wonderful. I think that sort of memoir of like
Oh,
being
my
that.
Duran Duran memoir. Oh
Yeah.
God. Yeah. What was the title? It has such a long title. I even forget. Careless Memories of Strange Behavior, My Notorious Life as a Duran Duran Fan. That was part of Rhino's ebook series. I think that was like 2013. And they wanted kind of like maybe the 33 and a third series, but they wanted all of those to be from the writers like um kind of specific point of fandom. They had a flock of writers. Someone did a Beastie Boys one, I remember. Someone did a Ramones one, but they didn't come to me with the band idea. They basically picked me as one of the writers, which of course was a huge honor, and said, what was like your band that like you could write about from a personal point of view that like was kind of your gateway band or your
Sure.
awakening band. I could have actually picked the Go-Go's honestly, but I gave them two options, Duran Duran or The Cure. But The Cure came a little bit later, and Duran Duran was really like, Duran Duran was kind of like my boy band. And I actually want to say, because I don't, the term boy band is a little bit of has a stigma to it. So I want to clarify that. I'm very grateful. If I'd been born earlier, my boy band, meaning my teen idol band, could have been, the Osmonds or the Bay City Rollers or,
Jackson 5.
Jackson 5 would be a good one, actually. But, it could have been like one of those Leif Garrett. If I'd been born, later, it could have been the Backstreet Boys or New Kids on the Block or NSYNC or Justin Bieber or whatever. Every girl who becomes a music fan has a band like that. And usually it is kind of a teen idol band, but by the circumstances of when I was born and when I got MTV, for me, it was Duran Duran. And they were like a real band. Like, yeah, they were fine. They were good looking. They were stylish. And of course, that was a draw for a lot of the girls who liked them, including myself. But they were like a band from Birmingham, England, who formed from an ad in the Melody Maker, gigged in clubs, a club called Rum Runner. When they got signed, the way a normal band does, from gigging and getting word of mouth and getting buzz and getting good press, they were produced by Colin Thurston, and they were on the Harvest label, and they had all these, and they were influenced by Roxy Music and Japan and Chic and the Sex Pistols and all the glam bands, T-Rex, Bowie, of course. So they were cool, is what I'm trying to say. They were like a cool, edgy thing. People tend to forget that because they became pinups, because they became Tiger Beat heroes. But that's where they came from. And I was, kind of an entryway to what I do now. I used to read every interview they did. And I particularly liked to get all the import magazines, which were a little cooler than, 16 and Tiger Beat.
Right.
So I read all the interviews and I always paid attention to the music they said they liked, because like, it's kind of a cliche question, like, what are your influences? And, they would say, oh, we love Roxy Music. We love Iggy Pop. We love Brian Eno. So I'm like, all right, let me check those out. So they really were a gateway to me to, what some snobs would say is cooler stuff. I never quite understood why critics hated them so much, given their pedigree. And my only theory is, and it's something that every teen idol has, whether it's Duran Duran or whether it's, One Direction or, even I think Harry Styles still gets some of it, is like, there's a misogyny and a sexism there, that if a band has a largely female fan base, they are somehow less credible, less cool. I don't understand that. Girls run the world. They're the ones that buy the records, the merch, the concert tickets. They made BTS and all the K-pop bands the biggest thing in the world. But there's a misogyny, and especially back then in the 80s, when all of the music journalists, unlike now, were men, older men, usually very raucous men. If they weren't sexist, they were at least raucous. And and if they saw bands that, despite where they came from, had a bunch of 10-year-old girls, wearing buttons all over themselves with pictures of Simon Le Bon's face. In my case, it was John Taylor's face. Just putting that out there. I had a ranking. We all had a ranking, and John was number one for me. But the fact that there's that teeny bopper fan base, like, automatically discredits a band. But when you look at people like Harry Styles, Duran Duran, even where Justin Bieber's at now, certainly where George Michael came from, where Michael Jackson came from, he boy band, it has always really bugged me. And maybe there was a little part of me going into this world that wanted to, like, sort of level that playing field. I'm very happy to see that Duran Duran, they don't get that anymore. Like, everyone loves them now. Mark Ronson says that The Chauffeur is the best song of all time, and he's not wrong. So, yeah, but yes, there's also, I'm sort of babbly here, but there's also a school of thought that music critics shouldn't be fans. I remember one music writer telling me, like, you should never tell an artist that, like, you had their poster on their wall when you were a kid, or that they were the first concert you saw, or that and I get it, you don't want to get too like Chris Farley from SNL and be like, remember that time you put out Rio? That was, remember when you said save a prayer for the morning after? Did you? But that was awesome. But I don't think there's any, especially in, like you said, this kind of Instagram culture and this outward facing social media culture. I don't think there's any shame or anything wrong in saying you're a fan. Like, why are you doing this if you're not a fan? Why did you go into, like,
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely. Agreed.
I
I love it.
100% come from that.
I love it. And I love this was such a journey and so fun. I want to ask you too, then, taking from that, if you're today's market and it was like you're get this opportunity, who would you say if you let's in other words, let's say you were saying if you were born 10 years later, let's say if you were born 20 years later now, and now you're a young girl in today's market, who would the band be that you would be following, do you think? How do I
Probably,
put that?
prob,
How do I put
prob,
that?
who would be my boy band if I was like 12 now?
Yeah, exactly. If you're
Oh,
12 years old now.
I'm sure it would have be BTS. Or actually, it would probably someone I'm already still obsessed with. It would be Harry Styles, who, I mean, I've been really happy to see how his audience has progressed with him. I think people sometimes I have to impress upon people when you see him in a dress, a Gucci dress on the cover of Vogue and doing the kind of music he's doing. I'll be like, don't forget, this guy was not just in a boy band, but a boy band formed by Simon Cowell on the X Factor. To see that trajectory of what he's doing artistically and visually. And I went to see him. One of the probably last concerts I saw was when he played his second album, Fine Line, in its entirety in December 2000, what year? 2019, the day it came out, and it was all girls, many young girls, probably
Yeah.
I would say average age 18. So they were probably people who had followed One Direction, and they were really just following him on in this direction where he's doing music that borrows from Bowie and Paul McCartney, and Stevie Nicks came on stage with him, and he was wearing like a pink suit, and he has all these classic rock references, and his fan base completely is going there with him. So I mean, I love him now, so I don't even know if that's an answer to your question. In terms of newer bands that I probably would be my boy band now, yeah, I mean, I probably wouldn't have been able to escape the BTS thing. And I love BTS. And I think it's awesome that K-pop and music that's not sung in English is so big in the Western world. I think that's
Huge, right?
amazing. And I think they're very stylish and very cute. I love their pastel hair. I love their fantastic dancers. I mean, when you see their performances, you almost think it's CGI because like their
Yes.
choreography is so, like their Saturday Night Live performance was insane. And I love them. I've interviewed them and I really admire their work ethic. I love all the K-pop stuff. I would probably be very into Blackpink,
Yes.
as a female, if you're talking about, beyond boy bands, be for the same reasons. And there's a band that I'm obsessed with. They were like my biggest band discovery. I mean, I sort of knew about them, but I got more into them in 2020. And I'd probably be super into them if I was a kid. Is this band Cub Sport from Australia? They are queer icons. They are amazing. I'll tell you the story very quickly. The two guys in the band, Tim and Sam, they were childhood best friends. At age 17, they started to date, but secretly. They were from like religious homes, so they were like they were kind of internalized homophobia as well as external. So they broke up after a year, but stayed best friends, and then started a band together. And then at age 25, finally decided to be together again. They've been together for the past 4 years, and they're married. They're married now, and every song is about it. Every song, if you listen to the 4 albums they've done, every song in the discography lyrically is about the journey. The first album was when they weren't together yet again, and then the second album was made when they got together 5 or 4 years ago, and every album is about this journey, every song.
Wow.
And it needs to be a movie, to be honest. Someone
Yeah.
make it a movie and call me, get me in on this. But I see their fan base, because I follow them on social media, and their fan base is super young, of all genders, girl, boy, non-binary, trans. And they've really inspired like a lot of kids to either come out themselves or just, be open-minded. And, it's just like, I start crying if I talk about them too much.
Wow.
I would have liked a band like that growing up when I was a kid. We certainly
Sure.
had artists that were, queer, like Boy George,
Yeah.
but he didn't really talk about his sexuality. We had
Sure.
Bronski Beat, but a band like Cub Sport, that's a very, it's kind of a new thing to be able to like
Very
be this
cool.
open.
What do you think about, since we're talking, I mean, we are talking about the power of the female dollar, right? Because they're purchasing these records. What advice do you have then for young women as far as letting their voice be known, that like, hey man, we're the ones that are buying these records? Like,
Well,
how does that happen? How do we do that?
Social media, man. I mean, as evil and awful as social media can be, and I'm usually very grateful that it didn't exist when I was growing up, because I think sometimes who knows what I might have said or done, or how, that would come back to haunt me now, just because kids could be dumb, or not that I have anything specific. I'm just saying, like,
Sure.
even just like a bad photo of me that's like on the internet forever. Also, like,
I try to post them ever so often because
I
I try to
probably
get
would
them
have
out
been
there before someone finds them, and it's
I
really fun.
probably would have been sending really bad hate tweets to like critics who didn't like Duran Duran, telling them to,
Right.
threatening their lives or something. You're like, you
Right.
suck. Yeah, yeah. So, and also, of course, there's a lot of bullying that goes on online that I'm happy I didn't have to worry about. But
Yeah.
that being said, social media is a great equalizer, and it's a great way for fan bases to mobilize. Just like I've been joking that if Twitter had existed in the 80s, I would have been completely like, spamming Duran Duran haters and attacking them, for better or worse. Like the BTS army, they get stuff done. And I love the fact that they also, like the K-pop army, they will like bum rush hashtags. Like if there's like a really like problematic hashtag out there, like, like uh has like white power hashtag or whatever, they will just like adopt the hashtag and spam it with gifs of BTS and
Yeah.
take it back. They're very woke. So yeah, I guess to answer your question about how girls could have their voices be heard, I mean, obviously use social media wisely, and take everything with a grain of salt, and take a deep breath before you hit send or whatever. But in terms of championing your artist, if you are an artist yourself, championing your own work, there's Twitter, there's TikTok, there's Kickstarters and Indiegogo campaigns, and there's Bandcamp, and the internet can be a cesspool, it can be a bad place, but particularly right now, when we're talking about the fact that we have to do everything online, it is a good way to get your voice out there, whatever it is you do, whether you're an artist, a fan, or both. So
Yeah.
yeah, use it wisely, but like that's a huge tool right there.
Yes.
So
Well, I hope that they're paying attention, that the record executives are paying attention. Do you think that when the music industry looks at things like the She Rocks Awards, what do you think the feeling is about that from people?
that's an interesting question. I mean, I tend to try to be an optimistic person. I'd like to think that they're paying attention.
Yeah.
I don't know. The music industry has a ways to go. We are seeing with bigger award shows like the Grammys, more female artists getting nominated and stuff. So, change is slow. Um, but I definitely think when you see the caliber of artists that are at She Rocks, and they are, of different ages and different genres, and this is the ninth one. So it's like you see with each year, you get these bigger artists that are, agreeing to participate and are getting honored and are coming together, and all these other musicians is that people donating their time. And even though, this one's going to be different because it's not live and in person, we've seen the turnout for the ones that happened during NAMM Week at the House of Blues Anaheim, and it's like a packed house. I mean, I'd like to think the music industry is taking notice. Do I have like a concrete example, like A happened, so then B happened? Nothing happens like that quickly overnight. But I tend, there's been so much conversation over the past 3-4 years, with Time's Up and Me Too. And I think a lot of people who were silent, who worked maybe in the 80s or 90s and had just kind of realized, or had been flat out told, like complaining about stuff or calling out people on their BS was something you shouldn't do. I think a lot of people came forward and said, oh, back this, everything from just horror, the ultimate horror, Harvey Weinstein style horror stories, to just smaller microaggressions about like radio stations being sexist to someone, or refusing to play music because it had a female fronted band. And oh, we already have one of those in rotation. Certainly every female artist has a story on a scale from 1 to 10 of some BS that happened to them. And a lot of those people came forward in the last few years. And Lizzie Hale, who's going to host the show this year, she was an honoree last year, and she gave a really incendiary speech about it. It was the speech of the night. So I think, having a space like the She Rocks Awards where people can not only give speeches like that, but and shine a light on those larger issues, but also at a place where you could be like, you're safe here. That's not going to happen to you. You know, it's like, I think sometimes when people just, I'm sort of thinking out loud. I think sometimes when, because there's been such an onslaught of people rightfully complaining over the past few years about things that have happened to them in the industry, I think a lot of people get fatigued of it and start to tune out. And I think that happens with a lot of movements. Like for one month, everyone's hashtagging and everyone's like, yeah, I think so. And then like it kind of goes back to status quo. And I do actually think, though, that is, as I said, a good thing about social media is that you can have a platform. I'm sort of just talking in a circular way. I guess what I'm trying to say is change is happening, but it's happening slow, but it's happening. And having a platform like the She Rocks Awards is a big part of that change. So, you know, things don't happen overnight, but I do think all the artists that are participating this year would probably say, you know, maybe it's not as far along as they'd hoped back when they started out, but it's the progress is being made. So, you know, it's great that these artists are getting a platform.
Absolutely. Well,
I don't know if that
that's very,
even answered your question. It's a lot to
I think
unpack.
it did. I was, well, I'm bringing in a lot of stuff that was sort of off the mark as far as what, you know, it wasn't, it
No,
was
no,
just,
no.
we're going in places and I'm enjoying it for me.
Yeah, me
So,
too. It's just a weird thing because, you know, there was like a lot of things that like maybe 2 years ago, there started to be these hashtags and articles of Jessica Hopper, who's a music journalist. She started a Twitter thread where she was like, talk about female artists or female people in the music business, talk about, you know, bad things that have happened to you in the business, anything from discrimination to, you know, the ultimate horrible things. And a lot of people started that the thread went on for days. And there were a lot of people reading it going like, very surprised, like, oh my God, I can't believe this stuff is happening. And then I talked to Alice Bagg, who is a great punk musician from who dates back to the 70s. She was in the Bags out here in LA. And I was talking about this, and she's like, why are people surprised? Like, really? You didn't know this was going on? So there's a bit of anger there, but you know, the fact that people are talking about things, I think helps. I think the fact that now there are award shows, not just the She Rocks Awards, but other award shows that are trying to correct the fact that they have, you know, historically only honored, you know, white, straight, older men, you know, every year at the awards, you know, and try to diversify it in different ways. You know, change is happening. I do think the industry is taking notice, and they should definitely take notice of who's buying the records, whether it's male artists like BTS or all the female pop artists or Cardi B, you know, Megan the Stallion. Look at Taylor Swift. She had the #1 album of 2020 and she released 2 albums in 2020. I think people are paying attention to that. I don't, if they're not, they're dumb. You can't ignore it. You're right.
for sure you can't. I mean, it's just, it is amazing to me, I guess, even just speaking to you about it, that, you know, really people don't take notice to the fact that like the sales are going to are by females, you know.
It's
And
always been like that. It was like that when the Beatles came out. I mean, you know, obviously I'm talking about a lot of male artists because I'm talking about boy bands, but their
sure.
sales tended to be driven by women or young girls. And I think they have a lot of purchasing power. They also are the ones that are more likely to buy the merch, whether it's dolls or Katy Perry's makeup or stuffed animals or special merch bundles like, you know, vinyl and t-shirts and collectibles and stuff. I think, you know, I don't really, it's sort of, again, I'm thinking out loud. There's something about the female fandom that is different from the male fandom. And I can't, this is a thesis someone needs to write, not me, but I feel like it's a little more loving. I don't know if that's the right word. Like whether it's a boy band they crush on, like BTS or Duran Duran, that they like dream of marrying someday, or it's a female artist they really look up to, whether it's Miley Cyrus or the Go-Go's back in my day, or Cardi B or Katy or Taylor. Like there's an attachment there that I don't know if men have to their artists in general. I'm painting with broad strokes here. I know that was my experience. You know, it was like I didn't just want to listen to their music. Like
Sure.
I wanted to live in their world. I wanted to
Yeah,
either be them or know them or date them or hang out with them. You know, but it was another level of passion that I think is a good thing, and I think is something that, yeah, record labels definitely shouldn't ignore. You know.
for sure. And yet here we are, we're talking about the fact that the Go-Go's had the #1 album, right, for I think it was 6 weeks. I can't remember the
Yeah.
amount of time, but and it hasn't happened since.
I don't know why that hasn't happened since. I mean, certainly I think back at the 90s, I've been talking about how things about progress. I feel like a lot of progress got made in the 90s that unfortunately, and again, this is like too much to unpack in this interview, but somehow it regressed. But I started to look at the 90s and I think, how did that even happen? There were so many female bands or female fronted bands. There were a lot of co-ed bands like, Veruca Salt, Hole,
Oh, yeah.
Garbage,
Belly, right.
Belly, the Breeders. There were a lot of like really strong women like Kim Deal and Courtney Love, and there were Alanis Moore, all of the what was called the Lilith Fair thing, Jewel, Alanis Morissette,
Sure.
Sarah McLachlan. I mean, Lilith Fair was a thing and it was very successful.
Yeah.
Female artists in the alternative rock space and the pop space and basically everywhere. I mean, country music, there's been a lot of talk about how country music, they're not giving a lot of radio play anymore to women. But when I think of the heyday of country, I think Shania Twain and Faith Hill, I
The
think of
Dixie
these,
Chicks and yeah, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Martina McBride, Sarah
Yeah.
Evans. I think of these like, iconic female singers. So I don't know what happened. But, when I look at who I was listening to in the 90s, it was so, and it wasn't even something you really thought about. You didn't look at Hole or Garbage or the Breeders or whatever and go, oh, there's a chick in the band or they're chicks. And that was what was cool about the Go-Go's is it was like the fact that they were chicks. And I know some people don't like the word chicks. I use the word chicks in a loving way. It means you're like a badass woman, it's just a term like rock chick. I consider myself a chick. But the fact that there were chicks in the band was secondary. It wasn't like, oh, female fronted band Garbage. Oh, female fronted band Hole. Oh, all girl band L7. To me, it wasn't. It was like an afterthought, and it became very normalized, and it became very cool. And I think a lot of, much as like the Go-Go's made a lot of girls want to pick up their instruments in the 80s, I think a lot of bands like L7 is a really, really good example. They were just fierce and cool. I think they made a lot of people want to pick, a lot of girls want to pick up instruments. I don't know what happened that I think maybe it was just the fact that maybe rock fell out of favor a little bit and pop came in and that ushered in women that were more stylized. But that puts me on another tangent because I also think a part of misogyny in the music business is people sort of dismissing pop and kind of assuming that someone like Mariah Carey doesn't co-write her own songs, which she totally does,
Yeah.
or assuming that Taylor Swift has ghostwriters, or even just sort of like this idea. There's always, I call it the Joanne phase, where all pop female stars seem to feel this need to strip away their artifice, like Miley Cyrus did on Younger Now, or like Lady Gaga did on the Joanne record, to show, oh, look, I'm a real artist. I don't need this makeup and these sequins and this leotard and this all this flash and all these smoke and mirrors. And I'm
Well, they
like,
don't need it because you're collecting all of it behind you, Lyndsey.
but why is it somehow more credible if an artist, a female artist, I should
Stripped down,
clarify,
right.
just plays piano or acoustic guitar with no makeup on, than if it's late, which Lady Gaga has done, and that Taylor Swift has done, then when if they're having a big, huge stadium show. I don't remember anyone back in the day saying, hey, David Bowie, strip away that artifice. Put away, take your makeup off. That's be more legit.
That old Ziggy Stardust thing isn't working,
No one was
right?
telling Boy George to take his makeup off. No one was telling Robert Smith to
Right.
take his lipstick off. No one was telling, maybe people were telling Duran Duran, but like, in general, they were a different thing. But, the idea that like some things that can be kind of fun for not all, but for a lot of women is the artifice of getting to wear makeup and fun hair and
Sure.
sequins and high heels and, kind of live that like diva fantasy, that somehow that makes your music less credible. That's a whole other thing. But maybe because pop came into fashion, it sort of wiped out the progress that was made with all of those alt rock women in the 90s. But I think there are women coming up now that probably are, the 90s are very nostalgic right now for people, and I think we're going to see a lot of cool bands. Like Dream Wife is a band I really like that very clearly borrow from that. Beach Bunny, band that clearly borrows from that era. A woman named Billy No Mates, who's like a British very agitator, provocateur, political singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
She definitely borrows from that. So I
Yeah.
think we're going to see that ripple effect, and maybe the progress will happen again.
Right, because everything goes through, it's like, is it singer-songwriters? Is it grouped bands? Is it vocal bands? Is it, whatever they're telling us to like.
Yeah, the thing is, women should not be considered a trend or a genre. I do remember in the
You're right.
90s, as happy as I was about all that stuff happening, particularly, like the Lilith Fair thing in particular, they'd
Sure.
put like, Jewel and Sarah McLachlan and Alanis Morissette or Fiona Apple, who's back, by the way, obviously, on the cover of Rolling Stone. It would be like women in rock. And I'm like, this isn't a trend. Like, this isn't being woman isn't a genre.
They're back again.
Yeah. So, you have to take that stuff with a grain of salt. But, at the moment, if they want to start another women in rock trend, put 3 cool rising female artists on the cover of Rolling Stone, I guess I shouldn't complain if that happens. It should stick around.
Yeah, you're right though. It just should be the norm. It shouldn't, again, there's so many gender labels on everything. But I think you're touching on some really great stuff, especially I mean, really, because of course, as a makeup artist, I'm a fan of costume. I'm a fan of dressing up. I'm a fan of a look. And I also feel like kids at home that are buying records, right? Females in particular, as we're noting, there's a fantasy there, and it's part of the fantasy. And
Yeah.
it is part of the fantasy, I think, of you can be whatever you want to be. If you want to wear, a rainbow wig or shave your head or do whatever, you do you.
Hmm.
Find your way.
It's kind of interesting, when I think of, we're using the term women in rock, but I think the real rock stars that are pushing things in an edgy way are the female pop stars right now. And obviously we were talking about, Miley Cyrus, and she's gone back to like this rock thing that definitely borrows from the 80s and 90s. Halsey, speaking of shaven head, she's just badass and cool. But you look at the visuals that, someone like Cardi B or Nicki Minaj or Lady Gaga are bringing to their videos and their stage shows and their costuming. And it's like they're the David Bowies. Billie Eilish, I mean, you mentioned her, like
Yeah,
her visuals and her style, but just in terms of a stage show,
sure.
music videos, presentation, that's all part of it. And they're the female pop artists are the ones that are really pushing things forward in a very like edgy way right now. It's not the rock band. It's definitely not the rock dudes for the most part. And I like the rock dudes too. I'm not a hater, but I'm just saying when you look at like who are other than The Weeknd, he's not rock, but other than The Weeknd, who's really doing some really cool stuff right now, it's mostly the women.
You're right. And I will say this, as being someone who has worked with many female musicians, and for anyone that believes that like something is manufactured or, that there's a machine behind it, trust me when I tell you that if someone doesn't want to wear something
Yeah.
or doesn't like that lipstick, they ain't wearing it.
But why is
So
the whole manufacturing thing? That's something only women get. Does it? I don't remember anyone going like, I bet Justin Timberlake doesn't even write his own songs. I bet it's all Timbaland, which, obviously Timbaland had a really big play in what just, I don't remember anyone ever accusing George Michael of not writing his own songs. I don't
right,
think people are even giving Harry Styles any crap for the fact that he has co-writers.
right.
But, everyone pours over the credits of Taylor Swift's albums Evermore and Folklore and goes, oh, Jack Antonoff probably did everything. Oh, Lord, she probably had people ghostwriting her songs. It's something like I remember last year or maybe the year before, the Songwriter Hall of Fame had its list of possible inductees, and Mariah Carey, who actually did end up getting in, she was on the list. And I was on my radio show, and we were talking about who on this list at that time, it was like 35 people, would be the ones that got on. And I said, oh, well, Mariah Carey like has to get on. If you're talking about hits, like hits upon hits, dozens of iconic, huge hits of the 90s and 2000s. Like, and a lot of people did not realize that people just sort of jumped to the conclusion that, someone hands her songs and she just like
Sure.
sings them and leaves. And I think that's something I think a lot of people think of female pop stars is that they aren't in control of their songwriting or their image, that it's basically some Svengali that like says, wear this, sing this. And, I'm sure there are some cases where that is true, but it's not usually true. And Mariah Carey is a total example of that. Lady Gaga, Madonna, my God. I never felt like anyone told her to roll on the floor.
Oh
That
no.
was all her.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you. I think actually you probably couldn't really tell. You can't really tell Madonna to do anything at all that she doesn't want to do. I think
She,
she's definitely going to be the one to tell you the way things are going.
have you ever done her makeup?
Oh God, no, I'd be frightened too.
I want to interview her really
Have a
bad. She's
heart
on my
attack.
bucket list. But
No, of course.
I would be nervous to interview her because
I
I
would
think
be
she'd be
nervous to do her makeup too. Yeah, it would be
and
that.
she has lots of stories, going back to people having horror
Sure.
stories. I think the reason why she is such a tough cookie and so intimidating and maybe has a sort of brittleness to her now that she did not have if you watch old footage of her from the 80s is because she's got so much shit through her whole life about why, slut shaming, why you dress this way, whatever. Oh, you have no talent. Someone else is writing your songs. Like every step of the way, she got backlash every step of the way, which I imagine could be really hard. But she's 62 and she's still rad. She's my queen in life.
She still is amazing too, but it always comes back to people saying, well, she's too old to be wearing that, or she should be this, or she should be that. And I think, you know what, like, do you, like my mother used to say, she was like, you know what, I know I'm not supposed to wear frosted eyeshadow at 75, but I like it, so everyone else can fuck off.
That's definitely ageism is definitely a thing in among women and all female celebrities for sure. I've talked to the Go-Go's about that, like Jane Wiedlin, who has various colors of hair. And,
Yeah,
at the time I interviewed her, her hair was very blue. And, we talked about people saying like, oh, at a certain age, you shouldn't dye your hair a certain color. I mean, a lot of the honorees that are getting accolades at the She Rocks Awards this year are people who've been in the business for a long time, like Nancy
yes,
Wilson, the Go-Go's, um,
Cherie, yeah.
Cherie
Mhm.
for sure. And, yeah, there is an ageism that all of them have gotten when that I don't think, their male peers get. I don't think when Bob Dylan put
Certainly
a
not.
record out last year or Bruce Springsteen put a record out this year, anyone said like, they're still going? Give it
No,
up already, man. Stop, you're 80, no
no
one.
one tells Mick Jagger that.
Perfect example. But yeah, I mean, I think that's changing too. I mean, we see how much everyone loves Stevie Nicks and how much
Yes.
everyone loves Joan Jett. But there's definitely an ageism that happens when someone you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If you if Madonna, for instance, obviously she's had some plastic surgery. Obviously she works very hard to stay physically fit and she shows off her body still. And she has pink hair at the moment and she is kind of, she doesn't dress age appropriately or whatever, and she gets flack for that. If she had gone the other way and aged gracefully and let herself put on a few pounds, let her hair go gray, did not get anything done to her face, dressed more conservatively, more matronly, people would be like, "What happened to Madonna? She used to be so hot. She let herself go. It's such a shame. She looks
Right.
like my grandma now." There's no winning. And you just got to wear what you want to wear, do what you want to do, which is what a lot of the She Rocks women are doing. But yeah, the ageism thing, there's definitely a shelf life for women in the music business, which I think is BS. I will say though that fun fact, I learned this actually kind of recently. Madonna's biggest hit she ever had is not what you think. Her biggest hit was "Hung Up." That was later in her career, and she was 48 when that song came out.
Amazing.
And then we see J Lo. We saw the Super Bowl last year.
Sure. Yeah.
Of course, people gave besides age shaming, there's slut shaming, and people gave Shakira and JLo a lot of crap for looking sexy and whatever. Again, if they hadn't looked sexy, they would have gotten crap for that. But those were
Absolutely.
women, age JLo's 50, Shakira's in her 40s, and they owned the Super Bowl last year. So
Oh
I do
yeah.
think things are changing there, but as I mentioned, things don't change as quickly as we always like. But they're changing. I try to remain
Yeah.
optimistic.
I think you're very optimistic.
I gotta be.
Yes, absolutely.